How does a person become a god? Not just a powerful leader, but someone whose people will follow them through anything, even the deadliest famine in history? Well, for Mao Zedong, the road to godhood started with a single secret speech that took place back in 1956.
So picture this. It's February 25th, 1956. The new Soviet leader, Nikita Khrushchev, gets up and gives a speech that completely shatters the communist world. And in all of that chaos, while everyone else is panicking, one man sees a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity.
I mean, this was an absolute bombshell. You have to understand, Stalin wasn't just some old leader. He was a titan, the guy who beat Hitler, who built a superpower. So for his own successor to stand up and publicly trash him, it threw the entire communist world into a tailspin. Now, while all the other communist countries are reeling from this, one man is just kind of sitting back and watching. And that man, of course, is China's leader, Mao Zedong. With the Soviets looking weak, Mao sees his chance to grab the throne and become the undisputed leader of the entire global communist movement. But first things first, he had to lock down his power at home.
To pull this off, Mao needed absolute, unquestioning loyalty. But here's the problem. How do you find your enemies when they're too scared to say anything? You can't just ask, "Hey, anyone here against me?" So instead, he came up with a plan that was, frankly, as brilliant as it was cruel.
He called it the 100 Flowers Campaign. It sounds nice, right? The idea was, let 100 flowers bloom. Let 100 schools of thought contend. He actually encouraged people, artists, writers, even party members, to criticize the government. For a moment, it must have seemed like a brand new era of openness. But it was a trap.
As soon as all those flowers had bloomed and shown their faces, Mao harvested them. More than 1 million people who had dared to speak out were rounded up and shipped off to so-called re-education camps. In one single move, Mao now had a perfect list of all his opponents, and he had silenced every single one of them. Okay, so with any opposition at home completely crushed, Mao's power was absolute. Now he was ready for his big move. A huge gamble to prove that his version of communism was the best. He launched this incredibly ambitious plan called the Great Leap Forward. The goal was to basically catapult China's economy past the West and cement his place as the true leader of the communist world. And the bet he made was just enormous. He pretty much turned the entire population of China into a giant army, with only 2 jobs: produce grain and produce steel. That's it. He promised this great leap would turn China into a modern industrial utopia almost overnight.
The whole plan really came down to 3 key pillars. First, farming was collectivized into these huge communes. Second, the entire population was ordered to build these little backyard furnaces to make steel. And third, and this is where things get really weird, Mao launched a campaign to wipe out 4 specific pests. And let me tell you, every single one of these decisions would turn out to be catastrophic. It is hard to overstate just how strange the Four Pests Campaign was. Mao literally declared war on rats, flies, mosquitoes, and sparrows. You had millions of people mobilized to go hunt them. They would bang pots and pans for hours on end just to keep sparrows from landing, until the birds literally just fell out of the sky, dead from exhaustion. Well, you can probably guess what happened next. With all the birds gone, what happened to the insects? Their populations, especially locusts, absolutely exploded. They swarmed across the country, eating way more crops than the birds ever could have. By trying to control nature, Mao had accidentally triggered a complete ecological collapse. And at the same time, the steel plan was a complete failure too. People were so desperate to hit these impossible quotas, they were melting down everything they owned, their pots, their pans, even their farming tools. And what they produced was millions of tons of this low-quality, brittle pig iron that was totally unusable. So, you have an ecological disaster, a failed industrial plan, and a farming system that's completely collapsed. This was the perfect storm of bad policies, and it led directly to the single deadliest famine in all of human history. 55 million. Just let that number sink in for a second. That's the estimated number of people who died from the Great Chinese Famine. It is the largest famine in all of recorded history. If you want to put that number in perspective, just think about this. The total number of people killed in all of World War I, soldiers and civilians combined, was less than half the number of people who died in this one man-made famine. And what's truly chilling is that Mao seems to have known this was a real possibility, and he was okay with it. In a document from 1959, he actually said he was prepared for half of China's population, that's over 300 million people, to die to see his vision become a reality.
A catastrophe this massive, well, you just can't hide it forever. And for the first time, Mao's godlike authority really started to crack. Up in the highest ranks of the Communist Party, a reckoning was on its way.
So, in 1959, Mao was actually forced to step down as president, even though he stays on as party chairman. His replacement, a guy named Liu Shaoqi, goes back to his own hometown and finds out his own relatives have starved to death. So in 1962, at this massive conference with 7,000 other officials, Shaoqi gets up and publicly blames the famine on Mao's policies.
He even confronted Mao in private. He basically told him that they were both to blame, and that he would make sure history recorded the truth of what happened. For Mao, this was the ultimate threat. This wasn't just about losing power anymore. This was about his legacy. This was about being condemned by history, just like Khrushchev had done to Stalin.
So, what do you do when you're afraid history is going to paint you as a monster? Well, Mao's answer was terrifyingly simple. You destroy history itself. You burn the books, you tear down the culture, and most importantly, you get rid of the people who could write it.
To do this, Mao needed a weapon, and he found it in a single word: bourgeois. He declared that the party had been infiltrated by these bourgeois elements. You know, just getting called that in communist China was a death sentence. And he used this label to target anyone who could challenge his story. Officials like Liu Shaoqi, intellectuals, professors, teachers, anyone.
And to carry out this nationwide purge, he didn't use the army. He mobilized an army of children. He published all his quotes in this little red book, and it became like a holy text. This quote in particular basically gave millions of teenagers a license to commit violence. It gave a whole generation a sense of purpose, and they were called the Red Guards.
The Red Guards, just absolutely full of revolutionary fire, went out to destroy what they called the four olds: old ideas, old culture, old customs, old habits. They beat their own teachers in public. They ransacked museums, burned ancient books, and tore down historic temples. Anything that represented a history before Mao was a target. At one point, they even attacked a farm of Dutch cows just because they were foreign.
By turning children against their parents, by destroying the past, and by making his own words into scripture, Mao didn't just get his power back. He tried to erase the very possibility of ever being judged by history. And that really brings us back to the central mystery. How does a leader convince millions of people to worship him, even as he's ordering them to tear down their own world?